Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who, in theory, has no business reviewing the new album by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Ice, death, planets, lungs, mushrooms, lava, salt, fat, acid, and heat. I'm going to review it, even though this is a description of the album by Stu McKenzie, the leader of the band. We'd walk into the studio, set everything up, get a rough tempo going, and just jam. No preconceived ideas, no concepts, no songs. We jam for maybe 45 minutes and then swap all the instruments and start again. You know, my channel is best known for underground hip-hop or post-punk reviews. You know, real structured music. And it may seem like I'm far away from understanding the world of jam bands and 45-minute explorations. But that's actually not true. I have a long history studying, caring, and loving jam band music. And I'm going to put forth a hypothesis. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard might be the best jam band there has ever been. That's going to take a while for me to really confirm. If you ever get bored, you can look behind me. That's an authentic Grateful Dead poster from 1968 when they played in Santa Barbara with the Doors. Kind of a cool poster. Hangs up here right next to the Kafka. And I want to talk about jam bands and what are they and what are they not. Now, the thing that I think really distinguishes King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is where they place on what I call the Dead-Phish continuum. Before I explain that continuum, let's talk about what even a jam band is. How do we define a jam band? Sometimes it seems as though bands that are defined in that way are just called that because that's what they're called. But if we really break down the elements that makes a jam band, we have super talented musicians who are ridiculously in sync with each other, who work together in a way that shows a sort of symbiotic relationship that permits a lot of extended improvisation, extended creation. This leads to great live sets. This leads to great live feelings of their recordings. At times, it can lead to a self-confidence that can lead to something that one might call self-indulgence. The two things that matter less in jam bands than other bands are songwriting and lyricism. So song structures, composition is usually de-emphasized, and lyrics are very de-emphasized. I mean, we have cringy, goofy lyrics like Washu Fitzi, Take Me to Firenze, sort of fake, deep lyrics, wake up to find that you are the eyes of the world, man. Put all these things together. Low emphasis on lyricism, low emphasis on composition, great emphasis on live performance and band cohesion, and we have what makes a jam band. Now to give you my bona fides, Jerry Garcia died when I was like 18 years old, but I still managed to see the Grateful Dead 20 times. Remember, I am straight edge. I was definitely straight edge then. I drink alcohol from time to time now. But yeah, I was a straight edge Dead fan, you know. And not only did I go and see the Grateful Dead whenever I could, you know, 6 nights in a row at the Boston Garden, but I also collected Grateful Dead tapes. I have over 100 hours. Now back in the old days, there was no internet, right? So you had to like put advertisements in these weird magazines like Relics, and you would give your address and people would send you their list, and then you'd send blank tapes, and then you'd get amazing tapes. And these are some of the best ones. You know, I'd make my own tape cases, you know, really cute there, little designs, Sky Peas, you know. I have a couple tapes from October 68, which is one of my favorite eras of the Dead. Obviously, February 13th, 1970, one of the most famous shows. My favorite show of all time in Wisconsin, April 15th, 1973. If you've never heard the Grateful Dead, listen to the second set of February 15th, 1973, Wisconsin. It's just amazing. A show here in Rochester in 77, show in Greek Theater in 84. I've listened to so much Grateful Dead. And I put them at the one end of the spectrum, which is the area of jam bands that I really sincerely love. And then we have Phish. Okay? Now, I've only seen Phish twice. This is a tape of the first Phish show that I saw. It was May 16th, 1992 at the Orpheum Theater in Boston. I saw them 1 year later at Great Woods outside of Boston. Both very good shows. And they are often put together. Dead fans and Phish fans are put together. But also, sometimes they're split apart. Sort of like Star Trek and Star Wars fans, you know? Like, you'd think that these sci-fi nerds would get together with their fantastic space tales, but in reality, there's something that doesn't quite match. It's actually very common to have either you like the Dead or the Phish. So the Phish or Phish. So it makes me think like what are the differences? How can we fit? Can we imagine there being a continuum between the Grateful Dead and the Phish? God, I gotta stop calling him the Phish. I sound like an old man. You're gonna go see the Phish? Between the Dead and Phish, okay? With the Dead, the things that I love about the Dead that don't exist as much with Phish is that they are cool, almost aloof. Jerry Garcia, I saw him play 20 times with the Grateful Dead. Once I saw his solo tour, and I never saw him do anything. He raised his hand once. One time. One time he raised his hand. In all of those 3-hour sets, I saw him do one thing that was cool. I saw the one guy, Bobby, go, 2 or 3 times. I never even got to hear the bass player sing maybe 3 or 4 times, okay? Like those are the special events. Amazingly proficient, amazingly experimental, wonderful concerts, but there's this kind of coolness and aloofness that they would have. Now, I'm talking about the Grateful Dead. I'm not talking about the Dead, which is fine, since Jerry died, but it's a different band. And then on the other side, we have Phish, where I think where the Dead are cool, the Phish are kind of nerdy. Like they're sort of tryhards, like they perform entire albums front to back, and they have trampolines, and they interact with the audience, and they come up with cool little things all the time, and they're trying so hard to please their fans. To their credit, I don't personally like it. I prefer the super aloof, oh my God, he raised his hand once. But still, in between these things, the similarities is this great musicianship. But in addition with Phish, there's a level of technical proficiency that's hard to really parse. But it sort of goes down to this tired and maybe true dichotomy between sort of like ability and the soul. Like, okay, you're super good, but do you play with any real soul? Or are you just, are you just the kind of person who gets on the cover of Guitar Player magazine? Or, are you like a real player? These kinds of divisions drive people crazy. If you are a proficient musician, you're probably mad at me. Feel free to leave a thumbs down on this video. I understand. Because I'm feeding into this dichotomy, which is potentially a false dichotomy. But definitely when it comes to like the musician's musician, that tends to be more in the Phish category than in the Dead category. Sometimes the Dead can be a little sloppy. Sometimes they can be a little bit less proficient, and they're not working as hard at doing these amazing and interesting things. So where does King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard fit in between these two poles? Dead center. That's why I like them so much. They are not entirely nerdy, okay? Their musicianship is very good, but it's really focused on melody, on rhythm. Yeah, they mess around with chord structures and microtonal this and all that kind of stuff, but they don't go fully over to that Guitar Player magazine nerdy, oh my God, did you hear what they do? But at the same time, they're not totally aloof. I mean, they've just released, 3 albums in the last week, or I guess 2 albums, and re-released 1 album. I don't know what they're doing. They're doing so much. They work so hard to please their fans. They are really emphasizing a lot of the great qualities of Phish and these great qualities of the Dead. And just mixing it all together with their own twist on everything, which is just, they put so much movement and layering in their jams. It's unbelievably satisfying to listen to this album, Ice, Death, Planets, Lungs, Mushrooms, Lava, Salt, Heat, Fat, and Acid. It's just amazing how rich this album is, how rich each song is. So that's why I think maybe King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard perfected the balance between these sort of two poles. What do you think of this idea? Seriously. Like, I'm wondering, does this make sense to you if you're a jam band fan, if you're a King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard fan? I'm like, is there a lot of overlap? Are there a lot of Phish fans who also like King Gizzard and Dead fans? Or is it possible that somehow King Gizzard has a fan base that is totally separate? I've noticed in the last couple years a huge rise of Grateful Dead t-shirts in my college classrooms and amongst my kids' friends in high school. Not their friends, but kids we see on the street. And it makes me sad because it's like, hey, the Grateful Dead are dead, all right? I mean, John Mayer's fine, but they don't exist, okay? If you're into jam bands, if you're into this cool, kind of funky, psychedelic, jammy music, put on some King Gizzard. They're releasing stuff right now that's great. I mean, right now, they are playing a series of shows at Red Rocks Amphitheater in Colorado. Now, if you're a Dead fan and you hear the words Red Rocks, you go 7/8/78. You know, July 8th, 1978, they played a couple of sets there, some of the best shows from the late 70s. King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard is playing in November, again, at Red Rocks. And I seriously am thinking about figuring out if I can manage it with my schedule and a newborn and 2 teenagers. Full-time job. Can I somehow make it out there? I cannot imagine how good their shows must be. And because I really study hip-hop, because I really take hyper-pop seriously, when I tell you musicianship is important, you understand I'm not coming at it as like, well, they're not even making their own music. They're not even musicians. I'm not I don't put down hip hop or techno or anything, ever, ever. All art is art, no matter how it's made. But it is definitely true that virtuoso musicianship has been in decline, especially in popular music. That's neither good nor bad. When you hear virtuosic musicianship like this, delivered with such so prolifically, we really need to appreciate it. I should also mention my own personal history as a drummer in a jam band. You've never heard of us. We were called Irving. We existed for a little while. There's a thing that happens, and you only know this if you're in a jam band, where you're playing together, and there reaches a point, like 15 minutes into a song, where you get a high I suppose is what people get when they do drugs. I don't know. But you feel like, you know how people laugh about like cocaine addicts, like how they get like, I'm the king of the world. Like that's how you feel. Like when you're in a good jam with like your good friends making music, you feel like the most powerful, the most brilliant genius on planet Earth. I cannot tell you the number of times that my band and I, when I was 17 years old and 18 years old, however old it was, and we were in this little beach house in Rhode Island, and we were just isolated from the world in the middle of the winter, and we would play a song, and we'd just be like, we are the greatest band that has ever lived. All other bands are garbage compared to us. We are absolutely the greatest. That's the feeling that you get. And when you hear King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, that is oozing out of their music. This confidence, this joy of music, of playing with people that you really know. So, what about this album? Iron, lava, salt, and fat. The main thing, again, is going back to this concept of movement and interest. If you are one of those bitter people who can't stand jam bands, that's fine, But they are not too self-indulgent. They're very mindful of their audience. They will mix up instruments. They will mix up layers. They will have small movements within the songs. And even though these are all very long songs, the way they all come together, it's surprisingly complex. Let me give you an example. Just click above the banana there for the song Mycelium. Now, for the Bjork video I did 2 weeks ago, I bought some mushrooms because her albums were all about mushrooms. She has a song called Mycelium. What is the deal? I unfortunately had to throw away that prop because the mushrooms got all moldy. But you can just imagine I'm holding up some mushrooms now. I want to give you an example of this album just by really going into what this song is. Really doing a very deep dive into the 7 minute and 35 seconds of music, okay? I'm going to take you through the whole song. Trying to take it by... Okay, so it starts off with 2 hi-hat hits. Not 4. Not 1, 2, 3, 4. But 1, 2. Already, by not going the full 4, we're perked up. And speaking of perky, we have a semi-reggae sounding song with these guitar chords on the offbeat and this nice kind of organ in the background and just repeating of this weird word, mycelium, over and over again, which is the way that mushrooms spread out underground. Almost, the saxophone sounds janky. The saxophone sounds like you're listening to an old Trojan Records Jamaican recording from the 70s. Like really, I don't know how they managed to get this sound on there. Some keyboards. At times, the drummer will do a little snare roll. And then we get into these lyrics. These terrible lyrics. And when I say terrible, I'm saying terrible without criticism, if that makes sense. Like the lyrics on this album are just like, come on, guys. But they need to have some words, okay? Because let's be honest. If there's no words, we're not going to listen. We need words. We need some kind of function. And when I say they're terrible, I just mean they're kind of cringy. I ain't a bald primate. That tongue does not relate. Man is done. The ape is dead. Lungs of the planet on a golden thread. Now the thing is, the way that they sing, you don't have to deal with these lyrics. They sing them so far behind the music that it doesn't really matter. Okay? Like, if there's some way you understand, if you're pissed at me because you're a giz head, a giz guzzler, what do you call yourself? I don't know. Like, you might be mad at me for saying the lyrics are terrible. And that's fine. Post your comments and put another thumbs down on this video. But it's that it really doesn't matter. And you have to evaluate the same way that you shouldn't evaluate techno or hip-hop according to the criteria of a jam band. You should not judge a jam band by the criteria of a normal rock band. It just is not as important. I ain't debating, I'm a mushroom, okay, spread like lava, rise like bread, currency of decay. So, while I'm criticizing these lyrics, they do at least have some basic idea, very similar to what Bjork was talking about, where we're sort of imagining human beings as being subordinate to mushrooms, that mushrooms themselves, with the way that they spread and that they thrive on decay. I could spend a little bit of time if I wanted to, sort of going on to a sort of general theory of post-2016, post-COVID nihilism and this belief that we need to reject humanity and embrace a sort of more primal form of being that can recapture energy like mycelium, like mushrooms can. I'm not going to. I'm just going to say that. There's a theory to be made. There's a paper to be written. There's another video essay to be made. Not much rhyming, I'm not a primate. My tongue does relate. Debating, okay, decay, some there, but it doesn't really matter. What really matters is what's happening behind. The bass player, I don't know. These guys are Australian. Is that why they're not put in the same like bucket as other jam bands because they're not American? I wonder. But a very, very Phil Lesh bass line, the bass player for the Grateful Dead. I love Phil Lesh. I have an autograph of Phil Lesh. Just wonderful, like searching. Phil had this ability to play bass that if you're a good bass player, you hear it and you're astounded by the sort of the ability that he has to wander around and find the right notes that might not be expected. But he's not, none of that stuff. None of that stuff. But when you hear it and you listen to it, you just have this appreciation for the fullness and the talent behind the bass lines. So in post-verse, we have this wah-wah guitar solo, very jaunty drums, more bass searching, and then every once in a while, this album is filled with the famous King Gizzard, woo! But it's not the woo that we have on previous albums. It's a more muted woo. Woo. It's a myceliac woo. Did you smash the like bucket? I actually asked you to smash the dislike bucket, but please smash the like bucket and subscribe because I just said myceliac. Woo! You don't get that from other music reviewers. No one's asked me to review this, by the way, which is weird. Every other King Gizzard album, they're like, when are you going to review this? No one's asking me. Maybe no one cares. So if you care, leave a comment. Tell me your favorite Dead show you ever went to? Phish show? I don't care. I do care, but let's move on. So then after this, woo, we have this like a very simple lead guitar line all the way throughout. I don't know who plays what on this band. I really don't. But I can tell you that the guitar work on this album is so good because, again, it's not finding blinding solos. You don't hear it and go, whoa, bro, sick thrash. You hear it and you just go, wow, that's an interesting lead line. That's an interesting melody that's found there. And then there's the saxophone in the back. And then there's this flute. And all the way throughout this album, we have flutes. They're very chippy flutes, okay? Not like, flute, but kind of chippy, sort of in the background. Comes with a sort of slightly different groove, and then constantly over and over again, Mycelium, total Phil Les style bass searching underneath the guitar lines. Mycelium, guitar doing all these little leads, and then woo, and then the drums change from a sort of general full drum kit to a ride cymbal and hits on the rim of the snare. Okay, so that's instead of pa, that's k. Okay, and then there's like a duel, like a silent duel happening, not a silent, but a hidden duel between the guitar and the saxophone, and then even a little bit of a flute, and then we had more singing coming in, and it's sung up high in a falsetto voice, and then here we have the drummer doing something which is super cool. If you have a drum at home, take a snare drum, and there's a little lever. You turn off that lever where it goes from pat, what you associate with the snare sound, to a pung sound. He's using that sound on his snare. And then there's this like break in the middle of the verse, and then there's a gong. And again, Led Zeppelin tried to make it worth having a gong on stage. They failed. I mean, it was worth it because it was cool seeing John Bonham hit a gong, but King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard deserve so much credit for truly integrating gongs into their music with a surprising frequency. There's these great guitar lines that resolve and go off, and the saxophone's in the back, and then we have some descending guitar lines against these flute trills, and then eventually the saxophone comes in stronger, and it's not janky, it's much more clear. All these amazing pockets of jamming that you find in here. And this is the thing, because I've never done drugs and listened to jam band music ever in my entire life, I've never taken a mushroom or smoked pot or whatever it is, I understand the thing. Like, this music helps me to understand that thing without hurting my brain function or triggering childhood traumas, okay? Which is why I don't do drugs. Like, I get that feeling, that lift, that rise, that sensation that I can see the music and I can feel the music because the music is so good. And I don't blame you. If consuming drugs makes this better, I understand the appeal. But I'm very thankful for this music because it can give me that feeling. It's so beautiful. It's so wonderful. You know, like when people would make fun of me for liking the Grateful Dead, because, you know, back in high school, all I listened to was like Nirvana and the Stones and De La Soul and then the Dead, you know. So most of my friends are like, why are you listening to this stuff? I was like, because it gave me this feeling. Because then we're not even done. This band works so hard to keep you invested and engaged with their jams. They are not too self-indulgent. Okay, hey Toby, I know you love Phish, but you gotta let me record this video. That's my dog, Toby. He might keep barking. I don't edit my videos, in case you don't know. So you're just going to have to hear him bark. He's actually trying to imitate the gong, because there's another gong, and then there's a quiet part with a cymbal on a ride cymbal, again playing the snare rim, and then we have these hammered-on guitar riffs. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, not that note, but that kind of idea, just like... He has all these bags of tricks, or they have all these bags of tricks. Like, how many parts are there in the song? I haven't been numbering them. I don't know. Mycelium over and over again with the word mycelium, and then the original groove comes back, and then they start singing more, and like the singing becomes more to the center. I'm still describing this first song, by the way, with just voices and the organ sound, and this high voice singing, falsetto. They use backing tracks so well. So, you know, I saw the Grateful Dead 20 times, and I think I've listened to a studio Grateful Dead album 5 times in my life. Like, I do not like listening to the Grateful Dead studio albums. I think they're bad. Like, they're bad. Like, 'cause the songwriting is, like, good, you know, and the performances are good, and the lyrics are, like, fine. But live, it's like transformational. Somehow King Gizzard is able to have the feeling of a live show in their recordings, despite the fact there's overdubs. Despite, you know, It's a very impressive thing that they're able to do, that very few bands are able to do. And I only ever listened to Phish studio albums in my in college with my roommates. So like, organs bleed with sucking maggots, metallic teeth, ancient goblet, increase the dosage with a droplet, black and gold beneath the surface. So, more kind of this gets into the druggy themes of mushrooms, and I understand that, that mushrooms are a drug. And as far as I can tell, that I don't know, because I don't do drugs. It seems like it's the best drug. That seems to be like the most, that's one that makes the most sense to me intellectually, but whatever. I also don't like having a stomach ache. Doesn't really matter. The point is, they're kind of playing around with the psychedelic component of mushrooms while also talking about the sort of spiritual concept of recuperating energy from decay. And then the drums come back, but if you notice, the drums aren't playing the exact same beat. They're a little bit further behind the beat. I'll make a biome a part of my mycelium, and then the song ends with a triumphant collapse. You can feel it. They are like, we are the best mother band in the world. Nobody can do what we just did. Whoo! You can feel it. It's a really exciting thing to feel. I'm going to go through the rest of the album way quicker. Even though I could, should I choose, describe each song with that level of detail. Ice 5 is the next song, kind of like a 70s funk soundtrack. The drummer is playing super lyrically here. Again, more Phil Lesh style bass lines, kind of built on sort of like funk riffs with like a rising line. Cool kind of like smoky clav sound. So another more wah-wah explosion. Really cool bit here with like heavy strum guitars. A beautiful guitar solo with the drums being played on a ride cymbal. And at a certain point, like the drums like very syncopated and they drop out once. And it sounds like it's an imperfection. It sounds like the drummer screwed up. Which, if true, warms my heart. That's what I want. I want those imperfections. Next song's called Magma. This is all seems to be based. And then another thing. When you're in a jam band, different musicians write the songs. So if a drummer does something, sometimes the drummer leads the band. Even though the drummer can't create melody, a drummer can create the jam. And a bass player can, and a guitar player can. Whatever it is, in a good jam band, it can be created by the drummer. And that's the sense we get here. This jazzy drum shuffle that then is matched with a kind of walking bass line. And then the guitars are sort of taking a secondary. They're doing kind of creepy crawly lines. And then just beautiful jam part in the middle of the song where it's like just bass and voices. Then leads into the full band joining in. It falls apart with this organ. And then a beautiful chippy flute. More even with the guitar work, this kind of vaguely microtonal sounds that they work on. Next song is called Lava. Catastrophic opening, kind of lower energy, which is nice to have a breakup in this long, jammy album. By the way, I should mention, so I talk about my family. My whole family loves this album. I could listen to this album on repeat and they would never be upset. My son said something to me, which I think is a great way to define. It's a great way to define King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard. Do they ever do anything bad? Are they ever anything less than really good? I don't know. I'm new to that. The first album I reviewed of theirs was KG. Which sadly was not about championship basketball player Kevin Garnett. But as far as I can tell, they don't miss. And, like this song is great because they take it down a little bit. The saxophone and the flute are finding their way. The pianos are finding their way. The drummer's finding his way, playing these crash cymbals. And then we have probably the best melody in the singing melody in the entire album. It's just beautiful, the singing and the way it interacts with the harpsichord. Probably the best lyrics that I've overheard as well. A lot of it's based on this theme of the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its tail. And it's tying together the concept of lava and lover and serpent. The lover is death, the lover is life, the serpent is life, the serpent is death, the head is life, the head is death. When I criticize their lyrics, I'm going to praise their lyrics now too. Yeah, in the way that it's kind of preposterous. It's kind of silly to be singing about such grand themes as life and death. But they do it well. I mean, I don't think that you should sing lyrics about the Ouroboros, the head is life and the tail is death. But if you're going to do it, they do it with conviction. And the entire album has a cohesive thought about these sort of forces of destruction and then the forces of regeneration amidst the decay. So, hey, that's cool. But then we get to the next song, Hell's Itch, which is about getting sunburned. Hey, Giz Guzzlers, why don't you tell me how Hell's Itch is not the cringiest source, the cringiest lyrics of all time? God. I mean, listen, I'm pale. You might have noticed this about me. I get sunburn. Well, actually, I don't get sunburn because I put on so much goddamn sunblock. Seriously, I put on so much sunblock. I have skin cancer, actually. You can see right there. See that little mark right there? I have skin cancer. I have to go see a skin doctor every year. So I put on a lot of sunblock. But, why not? It sucks getting sunburned and then it itches. Why not write a song? The lyrics don't matter. Okay, hey, I hear you. Hey, maybe this is about global warming. The sun coming down more. Maybe this is the itch that we all feel. Okay. Cool kind of guitar and flute to start. Kind of cuts out at times. Makes it kind of cool at the end with at the end the lyrics almost rise above the silliness of writing about a sunburn. Next song is called Iron Lung, which is not a Radiohead cover. Speaking of which, Radiohead, my dream is that Radiohead releases a jam band album because they are completely capable of doing this. And I think The Smile actually is a little bit of that as well. They have the ability to do music like this. I wish they would sometime. Another kind of jazzy drum beginning, jazzy guitar. It almost reminds me of like a hip-hop loop, but just being played. The final track is called Glies 710. Another jazzy drum saxophone start, kind of an ominous sound, again about terraforming the planet. Ridiculously awesome highlight in this album is the fuzzy guitar and the drums playing mostly on the toms, just like... There's no bad cut on this beef. That doesn't make sense. What I'm saying is, how when you cut up an animal, why am I talking about cutting up animals? I bet these guys are vegetarian. They seem vegetarian. Maybe not. Maybe most of the fans are. They're a block of tofu. There's no bad cut of a block of tofu, right? It doesn't matter where you cut this album. You take 3 minutes out of any part of this album and it's good. Certain parts are just ridiculously good, such as this fuzzy guitar lead line with the flutes behind in Glies 710. Oh, it's just so good. And then they even jump into sort of odd time signatures, which if we go back to that Dead Phish territory, the Dead obviously have a lot of songs where they play with time signatures, the 7, the 11, but in general, they're not trying to show off with that, where in general, Phish tend to be more in that realm of more whoa, check this out. But it's very subtle. It's very well done here. This kind of crawling guitar line and then a beautiful sax solo. That's one of 3 albums I could review. They also released an album called Laminated Denim, which I'm going to review super quickly. So this is, according to their Instagram, that they recorded this in the same way, except they had a ticking clock, which they used to create polyrhythms. So my main complaint is I want to hear the clock. I wish I could hear the clock all the way through. It opens up with a song called The Land Before Time Land. Great guitar coming in, guitar noodling, trilling piano, a bass. Then we have some harmonica. Okay, so there's harmonica with jam bands. A harmonica can only do one thing. All right? Pigpen with the Grateful Dead. Awesome. It's always the same. Just no. And I know what you're thinking. You're raising your hand, Professor Sky. Yeah, what about Blues Traveler? Dude, what about Blues Traveler? Blues Traveler is a great example of a band that said, hey, you know what? I can do more with a harmonica. I can make it worse. Anyways, I'm sorry. I grew up in the 90s. I grew up as a Deadhead. And there are all these bands that I was told I would like, just the same as the Dead, because they do the same thing, including Blues Traveler, Widespread Panic, Government Mule. And I like and dislike those bands in varying amounts. My brother loves Government Mule, so I've actually come to like them a fair amount. But Blues Traveler is a great example, and that's super, super technical. Dave Matthews Band, very similar. You wouldn't believe it, how popular they are. But just stop. You proved me wrong. You can do more than one thing with a harmonica. But Ian Malcolm. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Settles into a very kind of gizzardy, gauzy groove before almost like a Tool-sounding bass line. There's only 2 tracks on this album. You get Hypertension, has kind of pulsing drums, trailing guitars, this whole theme of laminated denim all the way throughout. And then it turns out they released an album a couple months ago that I missed, which they also re-released with this, which is the companion piece to Laminated Denim, Made in Timeland. And the reason that these albums are important to put together, you need to put all 3 together. You need to, okay? Because Made in Timeland is the same idea with the clock, except it's mostly created on computers. It's mostly created by futzing around with computers. There's some real drums, but in general it's like samples. It sounds like hip-hop at times. So what we have is a sort of reverse journey, where if we start at the end with Made in Timeland, we have a sort of jammy concept alone, and then we take the same concept and we expand it to the whole band. And then we remove the constraints of the clock. We then have iron, lungs, mushrooms, lava, magma, planets, and heat. So I think it's important to see them all together. So there's my theory. There's my belief. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is the greatest jam band of all time. They're not my favorite. I still love the Dead. I still prefer listening to the Grateful Dead. Like I might just go and listen to that Wisconsin show right now. But if you're out there and you're a hippie or you like jam band, and you don't have a job, whatever, get to Red Rocks. I bet it's amazing. All right. Until next time. Stay crunchy in the groove. There's the camera.